All right, I knew Betsy had done a showman short on the topic of Polly Bodine, so when I was asked about the full story, I really didn't expect the sheer mayhem that I uncovered. And when you hear it, I know I have a good imagination, but I could not have made this up if I tried. The short story is that Polly Bodine was a 30-something-year-old woman in Staten Island in the early 1840s. With a reputation less than stellar and a penchant for diverging from the accepted social norms of the day, she seems to have been something of a pariah. When her sister-in-law and baby niece were pretty gruesomely killed around Christmas time, fingers quickly pointed to her. 3 trials, a lot of tabloid justice, and a wax effigy in Barnum's American Museum later, Polly was acquitted for the murders, but after receiving the verdict, she apparently asked, "Can't I sue Barnum now?" But that summary hardly does justice to the salacious and unbelievable story of Polly Bodine. So let's start at the beginning. I'm Dr. Darren Raymond Locke, and welcome to Curious People Wanted. Mary Polly Hausman was born to oysterman Abraham Hausman and his wife Mary Mesereau around 1810 in Graniteville, Staten Island. She was one of 8 children. The Hausmans and Mesereaus were prominent families on the island during the 18th and 19th centuries, and Abraham made an additional fortune by leasing land to quarrymen. The lease brought him another $1.2 million in today's money, which added to the family's status and kind of sets the understanding of the type of comfort and stability that Polly grew up in. Staten Island during the early 19th century wasn't what it is today. It was a rural community of maybe 10,000 people, the majority of whom were engaged in maritime activities. Around the age of 15, Polly met an oysterman named Andrew Bodine, who owned a schooner called the Pearl, and the two married in 1825. They had 2 children, William Alfred Hausman Bodine, born in 1826, and Elizabeth Ann Bodine, born in 1828. The marriage, however, wasn't a good one. Andrew drank heavily and was abusive. As a result, Polly took her 2 children and moved back to her parents' home. She tried to engage in various activities to provide for her family, including setting up a grammar school, but her reputation was tarnished. Divorce wasn't common, and women just didn't leave their husbands regardless of abusive behavior or mistreatment. Suffice it to say that her school had no pupils. After she left, Andrew's situation did not improve. Sources say that he, quote, became blunted in every moral sense, unquote. He became intimately involved with a woman named either Sarah or Jane Simpson and married her on October 27, 1842, despite still being married to Polly. His drinking continued, and about 2 months after his marriage, he reportedly beat his new wife to death. Despite being indicted for murder, he was acquitted of that charge. He ended up being tried for bigamy and wound up in Sing Sing prison, where he died on March 29, 1844. Back to Polly, though. By the late 1830s, Polly was seeking work. She ended up working as a shopkeeper's assistant in Manhattan in 1839, around which time she met an apothecary named George Waite. Her then 13-year-old son, William, became his assistant. George and Polly began a romance, which was kept pretty quiet. She was still married at that time, but she remained living with her parents in Staten Island. Next door to her parents was the house of one of her favorite brothers, George Hausman, who was also a schooner owner and made his living in oystering as well. George was married to the daughter of another prominent family, Emmeline Van Pelt, and the couple had a daughter named Eliza Ann. Polly was close to Emmeline, so close, in fact, that it was she who delivered Eliza Ann, and when George was at sea, either Polly or her daughter would stay overnight with Emmeline, as she was nervous about being left alone with the baby at night. So here's where the murder happens. Polly saw Emmeline on December 23rd. 2 days later, on Christmas Day, people noticed that George's house was on fire. Someone entered the house to find the horribly bludgeoned bodies of both Emmeline and her 20-month-old daughter. Silver and other items were missing, which were later found to have been pawned. But the fire seems to have been started to hide the grisly murders. I'm not going to go into all the details because it is too long, too intricate, and some of the details are not appropriate for this channel. Not to mention a book was recently published about this very event, so I'll briefly summarize. Polly ended up looking suspicious. Despite testimony otherwise, she was potentially the last person to see Emmeline and her child alive. Her boyfriend, George Waite, was in debt to her father. She was seen drinking gin and eating pie on a ferry the day after the murders. Pawnbrokers testified to the fact she pawned a watch and some silver items that belonged to her brother and were stolen from the house, and she had no alibi for Christmas. That's all pertinent, but Polly's also a haughty woman who does not conform to social conventions of the time, so she looks even more guilty. At Emmeline and Eliza Ann's funeral, Emmeline's father outright said to his family that Polly is the murderess too, which absolutely didn't help. And soon New York tabloid newspapers like the Herald, Sun, and even the Evening Post began printing sensationalist articles, which led to further outrage and promoted rumors. Okay, so let's get back on track. Polly was taken into custody on New Year's Eve, but no one knows that she was like 8.5 months pregnant. She ended up giving birth to a stillborn child a few days later. This was scandalous at the time for a whole slew of reasons, but fed into further rumors that enveloped her apothecary boyfriend, George, who, by the way, was also incarcerated and charged as an accessory after the fact. But I'm not going to focus on his side of this at all. Polly's first trial, yes, first, began on June 23, 1844. This trial ended with a hung jury. There was one man who refused to render his judgment because he didn't get the quote-unquote circumstantial evidence in the fourth degree he was looking for. In hopes of procuring another fairer trial, a second trial was held in March 1845 in Manhattan. At this point, the newspapers published woodcuts of Polly that looked like every stereotypical picture of a witch you've ever seen. And at the same time, P.T. Barnum displayed a wax effigy of Polly murdering her sister-in-law and niece in his American Museum that he labeled the Witch of Staten Island. And, by the way, the effigy not only looks like a toothless 70-year-old crone when Polly was only in her mid-30s, but the museum is literally like a block away from the courtroom where the trial was being held. Polly was convicted by the jury at this second trial. Murder was a capital crime in New York, so Polly was slated to hang. However, 3 weeks later, in May, the state Supreme Court invalidated the verdict and ordered a new trial. This time, the trial would be held in Newburgh, Orange County, New York, in the hopes that they might get an impartial jury and have a fair trial. The trial in Newburgh occurred in April 1846, and Polly was found innocent. Reportedly, after dissolving into tears and flopping into her chair, Polly turned to the person next to her, who was her lawyer, and said, "Can't I sue Barnum now?" And no, she never did sue him. That's directed to the person who asked me to do a video on this story and specifically asked if she did pursue legal action against Barnum. The same year she is found innocent, a really horrendous pamphlet was published and marketed as being written by Polly herself. It's a slanderous, horrible document with no merit or intent other than further capitalize on the scandal and promote rumors in and of themselves. The motive for the murders of Emmeline Van Pelt and her daughter are thin, and there are other ideas of what actually happened. The Manhattan trial seems to have considered manslaughter at one point, and there is a witness who says that he saw a man in a Spanish jacket come out of Emmeline's house with a woman. There's also a story about George, Polly's brother and Emmeline's husband. The story states that he was walking around New York with $1,000 of silver and was followed home by a gang whose intent was to steal that money. There were also a ton of salacious twists and rumors in this trial, which I didn't feel was appropriate to put in this video. I'll leave all of you to investigate further, but what happened to Polly after? Well, in the 1850s and 60s, she isn't on the census, so it isn't clear where she was, and her daughter was living with her parents during at least part of that time. Polly appears in Staten Island in the 1870 census and lives with her son, who worked as a seaman and later became the captain of a schooner himself. Her daughter moved in with her by 1880. The short story is that Polly became somewhat of a recluse. She died in 1892 after being ill for the better part of a decade. She was buried in an unmarked grave in Graniteville Cemetery, with her funeral only attended by her 2 children. Polly's lasting legacy is that she was the first woman to be put on trial for capital murder. Please like and share this video, subscribe to our channel, and feel free to comment if there's a topic you'd like me to explore more. But most importantly, remember to stay curious.